Welcome to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. Today I'm joined by Swindon Town and Wales legend Paul Bodin. You'll know Paul for that left foot and that Wembley penalty in 1993, sending Swindon Town into the Premier League. But he spent over a decade developing the next generation of young British and Welsh football talent, working with future stars from youth level all the way through to international football. In this episode, we break down pressure, penalties, and the brilliant basics of coaching, from building enjoyable environments to helping players make the leap from development to performance. Let's get into the conversation with Paul Bodin. Right, Paul, cast your mind back. It's 31st of May, 1993. Steve White has just been brought down in the penalty area and you pick up the ball with the chance of putting Swindon 4-3 ahead in the playoff final, looking to be promoted into the Premier League for the first time ever in the club's history. This was also my first ever football game. Holds true for me and it's important to me in many ways. And I want to ask you about pressure, because obviously you were kind of a left-footed penalty taker, and not just that moment, but many moments in your career will have had the pressure of taking a penalty. And I wonder, how did you deal with that? What were your strategies for remaining in the zone and cool and calm and collected when it mattered most?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to physically prepare, for a game of that magnitude in terms of that one isolated moment. I mean, throughout the season, as you said there, I was predominantly the main penalty taker. So you kind of have that pressure on a number of occasions throughout the season. You can practice on the training ground as long as you want. But ultimately, when you're put in that position, I think it's just, going over what you've done previously, striking the ball cleanly, and obviously hitting the target. And, back then, less so than what it's like today. I mean, goalkeepers watch so many penalty takers taking penalties, and they can perhaps try and work out where players will hit it. I used to go from one side to the other, high and low, depending how I felt literally in the build-up to that particular penalty. Sometimes, I can't say you're in the lap of the gods, because your ability and your calmness pretty much were crucial at that particular time. And thankfully, the goalkeeper does drop to his right, and I hit it low to his left until it hits the back of the net, and then that's when the relief comes through, and you realise the enormity of it. We were 3-0 up, and then for Leicester to come back to 3-3 was incredible. I mean, even when you watch the game back now, it's such an exciting game, incredible game, and we could have perhaps gone on and won the game without the penalty, but the penalty was what decided it, and I was delighted to take it, score it, and take us into the promised land.
What a moment. And I'm sure that if we just boil this podcast down to listeners who are Swindon Town fans, we've got a very small audience there. But for any football fan who recognises going up through the playoffs, especially in dramatic circumstances as such as a penalty towards the end of the game, and what a game that was. Yeah, it brings back lots of really good memories. I'm thinking about penalties and becoming a penalty taker. Like, what role did coaches or others around you have in that? Is it something you always felt comfortable doing? Were you encouraged to do it by Glenn Hoddle or other people coaching the team?
Yeah, I mean, I was not a natural goal scorer, but it was something that I enjoyed doing personally. Up until I was about 15, I was always a left winger or a number 10, number 9. So it was only when I got to about under 15s, under 16s, I actually went back to a left back position. So I always saw myself as an attacking fullback. So I enjoyed creating, getting crosses in, and also getting on the back post and scoring various goals throughout my career. So it was kind of a naturalist thing, but it's still, as we know, scoring goals is still the hardest thing in football. But I enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed creating and goal scoring opportunities for other players too.
Now, Paul, before we get into the full conversation with your additions to the game plan and your game-changing advice, I've got some quick-fire questions just to get us started and an insight into maybe some of the influences on you and your journey through playing the game and coaching the game. So quick fire, or relatively quick fire. Who was your first footballing hero?
Pele. I remember watching him in the 1970 World Cup, I think it was, when I was about 6, allowed to stay up a little bit later. And my love for football was pre that. But obviously that took it to another level. And watching someone like Pele play the game was incredible.
Who's the best teammate you've ever played with or opponent you've played against?
Best teammates? I mean, we had so many at Swindon for sure. And then playing for Wales was incredible as well, rooming with people like Gary Speed and Ryan Giggs. So there's so many. It's hard to pinpoint one. Playing against the Germans when they were World Cup winners, Lothar Matthäus, unbelievable player, Klinsmann. They were world champions at that particular time. Enzo Schifo for Belgium. So, yeah, again, there are so many wonderful players that I played against, but they're the kind of the main sort of standouts.
From your memory, best away ground atmosphere?
I remember going to the Stadium Light when that opened, and I just thought that was wonderful. And indeed, before that, the Roker Park Stadium, they're so passionate up in the northeast. And then playing for Newcastle myself across the bridge there, Newcastle fans are incredible. I mean, the passion up in the northeast for football is ridiculous. You know, you talk about stadiums and to play at 2 Wembley appearances, Wembley playoffs for Swindon, you don't get much better than that either. So really enjoyable. But you've got to win there, haven't you? When you go to Wembley, you can't lose. And as much as the playoffs are fantastic, to lose in a final would be devastating, as I've seen. But thankfully, not as a player.
I've not had to experience that one. When I first went to Wembley, that game, Swindon's 3rd appearance, I think, and 3rd win. And then since then, they've not even scored a goal at Wembley. It's hard times.
It's been frustrating, really, because I've been to quite a few of them games as well. And I mean, the Charlie Austin bobble, which is well known.
Oh, no.
It looked like he was going to score the winner, and then the ball literally bobbles up, and he couldn't quite get the contact on it. But yeah, there's been other games where we haven't quite been at our best for one reason or another. But let's hope so the next time we go there.
True. Yeah, I'm getting flashbacks now, so let's move on. Final 2. So any pre-match superstitions?
I always used to put my left boot on after my right, and I would always wear the same tie-ups. We used to, in the old days, the socks weren't quite the same as they are nowadays. So I used to keep the same tie-ups and not wash them. So they're quite dirty and smelly in my kit bag. But I used to keep them until we lost. On a few occasions, there were some good runs. But the main thing really was I always tied up my left boot after my right.
Nice. Not the wildest superstition I've ever heard, but...
Well, did it work? Who knows? I felt it.
Absolutely. And drawing it back into our conversation about coaching, like who's been the most influential person on your development as a coach?
Well, playing... I mean, it's funny, actually. I'm always constantly talking to ex-players, and we always look at the past and so on. And in all honesty, back in the early days, there was very little coaching. It was organised training. But it was under Glenn, really. I mean, Ozzy was a motivator, a man manager, gave you the confidence. Lou was a fitness man in terms of getting everybody fit and treating everybody the same. Ozzy took it to another level in terms of looking after players and making you feel like you were the best player. But the all-round coach really was Glenn. I mean, when you look at Glenn's ability, we still practiced short, medium, and long passing every day. Every training session, we would practice our passing. So that told me something, that all players can practice and get better. And that's one of the biggest things really in my coaching career, that I still believe players can get better. You've got to make it enjoyable. Not just, I'm not just saying stand 5 yards apart, 10 yards apart, but you've got to create little passages of passing. You've got to give them angles to hit, using the outside of your foot, the inside of your foot, controlling with different parts of your foot and different parts of your body. And they were the fundamental basics that we practiced day in, day out. And I think that's why we became the team what we were. We were such a well-rounded football team, but it was down to practice. And, we went from Lou Macari's direct football to Ozzy changing it to a 4-diamond 2 strikers, a 4-4-2. And then Glenn took it to a 3-5-2. So the variations in that early part of my real development side of my own mind. And I remember I got a little injury, a little medial ligament, and I was out for about 4 or 5 weeks. And to sit and watch the team play was a huge learning curve for me. And that was under Glenn Hoddle's time at the club. So yeah, it was very enjoyable every day. I think every day, every session, you've got to try and make it enjoyable for the players. I think when you're enjoying it, you're learning, you're progressing, you're opening up your potential. I think it's important that you let the sessions flow as much as they can and let the players find the solutions. Although they can be guided, I think it's important that players actually can find the solutions themselves and then replicate them and not always rely on you as a coach to keep reminding them, although that's what we obviously have to do.
Just to play back some of the things that you've said, fundamental skills, I'd almost frame it around brilliant basics, I suppose.
Yeah.
Keep enjoyment at heart. That's where learning happens, creating a space where players can find solutions for themselves. And I hear this misconception sometimes, or I think it's a misconception that the higher level that you're working at, that things need to be exponentially more complicated and complex. But maybe it's the opposite to that from what you're saying, keeping things simple and clear and reminding yourself of some of the basic things done well feels like a really important ingredient.
Well, absolutely. I think as an ex-player, and then went straight into coaching. I actually went into Bath City and I was a player coach there. So that was another good, real learning curve for me to be on the pitch and be able to help players physically and mentally perhaps football and games, but to be on the pitch as well, that was a real big help. But there's no doubt the game can be overcomplicated, and I think it's important that coaches do simplify it. One of my big sort of second learning curves was joining the Welsh FA, and we used to record a lot of the training, a lot of the good practice, some of the bad practice. And before each training session, when we were on camp, we'd have a 10-day camp. And on introduction, first day, we would always show them good practice, things that they didn't do quite so well in the previous camp. But the emphasis was always on positivity and showing them examples of good practice. And before training, before the session, we would always show them exactly what was required. 2-3 minutes, video clips, analysis work. Keep it short, sharp, and concise. And like I said, let them take the session. Let them show that they're learning from the classroom, albeit briefly, but then putting things into practice very quickly. You know, we'd often have 1 or 2 training sessions before a game. So you're bringing all these players in from various clubs, various styles, different philosophies, and we've got to change them into what we call the Welsh way, was the way that we wanted the players to come on camp, enjoy it, play, and express themselves. And I think if you can keep them things simple, then the platform is there. And I always used to say, this is your platform to go and execute the things that we're asking you, but also the good things that you do day in, day out.
For me, there's something really valuable in what you just shared around building on strengths and highlighting the good stuff. Being a treasure hunter as a coach and bringing that to the surface as the platform to build on, rather than being a deficit detective. And I've been there myself, and I've experienced it whilst playing and being coached. But you do sometimes there will be coaches whose coaching revolves around finding the areas where things have gone wrong, rather than building on the stuff that's going right and then adding to that. And I think those kind of principles you've highlighted there about come and enjoy yourself, come and play, and then express yourself must feel really enabling for players when they step into that environment.
Well, absolutely. And you get a feel for the session, don't you? You can tell players, they give their feedback quite freely, really, whether it's in the training session themselves or the way they talk and describe, and coming to training. You know, we rarely had players missing camps. You know, even if they were injured, they always wanted to be there. And I think if you create that environment over a period of time, you know, you've got to have that right environment to develop and learn. And my first camp with Wales back in 2012, it was people like Harry Wilson and Dan James and Joe Morrell all went on to represent the senior team at, you know, the highest level, World Cups. And to see them at 16 years of age and then to watch them develop and help along that pathway, it brings you great joy. Nobody knows really. You see potential, you see ability, but you don't really know unless they're guided along the pathway and what attitudes they've got and the desire and the sacrifices that they have to make to go on and be wonderful footballers, but also wonderful human beings. And most of these top quality players do tend to be good people as well. You know, they're willing learners, they're willing to put something back, they're willing teammates. They're not just individuals who play for themselves. And working for Wales, we're a small nation, and I thoroughly enjoyed my 10 years working with these top players. But they all had that one real good thing of desire to play for their country and give their utmost every single time they pull their shirt on. And it was always a pleasure to turn up and coach these boys, but also to be their leader over a period of time and qualify for younger tournaments, 17s and 19 tournaments. We qualified quite regularly, and to see the joy on their faces, the coaches' faces, the parents who would travel the width and breadth of Europe where we played, it would bring us all a lot of real pleasure in doing that. But a lot, it is down to the players. We can offer them a platform and an environment, but ultimately it is down to the players to showcase what they've got.
On another one of these podcasts, I interviewed a guest called Joe Baker, who's a world-leading researcher in talent ID and talent development. And he highlighted exactly the same thing, that one of the characteristics for athletes who come the full extent of the journey is that desire and that determination, the drive, if you like, to work harder than anyone else, to put in absolutely everything into what they do. So it's really interesting to hear you say that, that really stood out as something that would be a determining factor, if you like, in terms of how successful the athletes could be, the players could be. Something you said as well takes my mind to an unhelpful parallel that I think coaches see sometimes, especially in football, and I can only speak to my own experiences. Coaches working with children might look at Premier League managers and see them orchestrating and instructing from the sidelines and think, well, that translates into my coaching with the under-7s. Now, you and I know, of course, that's not true. The coaching behaviours needed to help under-7s and younger age groups enjoy the game and explore and take risks and be bold are really different. It's a different outcome to working at the highest level of the game. And you mentioned earlier that perhaps sometimes there's a need for those managers to be direct and instruct. It is part of the game sometimes. But working in the pathway with the under-17s like you were at Wales and through the age groups, if we were to turn up to one of your coaching sessions in that environment that you've explained, what would we see and what would we hear from you to get the best from that group?
Well, you wouldn't hear a lot. Like I said, the initial pre-training or pre-practice, I used to call it, is given the information. The setup, the planning is all pre-done. And then once the session starts, basically it's up to the players. Obviously, the occasions, there'll be a stepping in and maybe a demonstration, whether it was from myself or another player, and let the players do the demos because they're the ones who ultimately, this is all about. And basically, let it flow. Let it flow as much as you can. And at the right times, step in and show them the good practice. So when they've done it well, show them. Don't always show them the bad stuff, but occasionally just remind them this is why we're doing the good stuff, to eradicate the bad stuff if we possibly can. But I think you touched on there, depends what you're coaching, whether you're coaching young players, 8s, 9s, 10s. And I did that as well. That was another good learning thing from my perspective. I coached the 8s to 16s, and then I went to seniors, and then I went back down and did 18s. So I've kind of been through the whole system, a 10-year program, then to seniors, and then back down to 17s, 18s, 19s, 21s. So there are different mentalities towards the coaching, of course, because once you become a coach or a manager of the senior, it is results driven, and it's become more and more results driven because 3 games you could be the best manager, 3 games you can get the sack, and it's crazy. I think The game has changed really badly in that respect. The managers are not given time to incorporate all the things they would perhaps really like to do, and more emphasis has to be about winning, because ultimately that's what will give them time. Where you could go in, obviously, if a manager takes over maybe in the summer, he's got a lot more time to build something through the summer, albeit 4 or 5 weeks. But even that is better than stepping in on a Wednesday or Thursday afternoon, 2 training sessions. You've just stepped in, the manager's sacked, and you're trying to turn a group of players around. And you're only in that position because the team are not doing well. Very rarely would a manager step into a team that's winning every week. So you've got to try and rebuild confidence. You've got to try and build the basics, and you've got to try and build a winning mentality very, very quickly from where they were, only a day or two ago. So development football is quite different. And maybe that's probably where I spent most of my career, but thoroughly enjoyable because you get the rewards from seeing the players develop over periods of time.
Paul, I'm going to shift the conversation slightly because there's something I'd really like to ask you about, and that's being a parent of a footballer. Now, there'll be lots of coaches listening who have to consciously think about how do they engage with the parents of the children that they're coaching. And from my own personal experiences, see parents as a huge opportunity to work with, because if you get it right, then you can significantly add to almost that ecosystem of support that surrounds an athlete, surrounds a player. And like your son, Billy, he's had a career in professional football. And I'm really curious about how you navigated the line between being dad and being coach when Billy was growing up.
Well, I mean, I think I'm pretty fair and pretty honest, and I believe that you obviously treat all players equally. Whether it's your son or perhaps a parent's son who you don't particularly like, but you're in it for the right reasons. You're in it to help these boys progress. I probably was a little bit harder on Bill, maybe at times, because I expected more, because I know what he's capable of. But it's a common thing, isn't it? It's certainly in grassroots football, where the parent takes the team because he perhaps initially goes to take his son to a football club and then feels that he could help and improve the whole setup. And a lot of parents do that, as you say, you've done yourself. So I think I wouldn't say you err on caution, because the modern world now, we all have to be careful what our language is and how we treat players, and physically, mentally. Fairness, I think that's probably the best word I can use. Just be fair to everybody. Give everybody an equal opportunity. I'd watch my granddaughters and I watch my grandson go and play, and the players get rotated, don't they? Quite regularly. They go in goal and they play on pitch and then up front, and so they kind of rotate them around. And I just think generally be fair to all the players, encourage, create that environment as I've touched on already, and let them players go as far as they possibly can. Don't try and take anything away from them. Just try and help and add little bits that they can possibly take on board.
You mentioned a moment ago that sometimes you might have been a little bit harder on Billy. And I think parents always are leading with the best intentions. They just want the best for their kids, but sometimes might get the balance wrong and could accidentally add a bit of pressure. So with your experiences, what did you learn about getting the balance right?
Well, I think that's another key part, what you said there. I mean, I know when I knew parents back then who would leave Swindon Town Centre of Excellence and they'd be in the car with their dads, and their dads would be giving them so much information and perhaps overzealous in their comments, because we all want our sons. I've heard it on the sidelines, my son or so-and-so, he's going to be a Premier League player. This player's going to be a Premier. And the reality is, I mean, I remember years ago, it was something like 1 in 600,000 young players actually become a professional footballer. 1 in 600,000. I would imagine that's higher now, because the way the game's changed, how everybody wants to be a footballer. Everybody. 99% of kids growing up, they want to be a footballer, and they're perhaps over-encouraged by their parents. Parents can be a little bit overzealous in their comments to their kids.
Incredibly valid point. Incredibly valid. And I think it's really difficult for coaches to be able to find a way to help the parents have a clear role. So another guest on the podcast highlighted that help parents recognize that their role is unconditional love and support. And then that helps the coaches do what they need to do, but it also gives parents permission not to be the technical director, the coach, all the other things that they maybe take on because of that overzealousness.
And I think as a football club, when we had the Centre of Excellence and then we went into the academy under the EPPP, we would often meet the parents, and we started segregating the parents to one side of the pitch and coning them off and keeping them at a distance where they can be there, they can support and they can cheer. But it's important that they don't give comments of what they expect their player, their son or their daughter, to actually do. It could quite easily be contradictory to what we're asking them to do. And then the player's confused. You see players looking over and waiting for their dads to give them, the confidence, the compliment, or if they know they've made a little error, which we're not really worried about, but they know they might get it in the car on the way home. Oh, why did you miscontrol it? Why did you do that? They don't mean to do it, but it's important that we encourage and guide the correct way. And I think that all football clubs now professionally are much, much better. I'm not saying they're all still 100% perfect, but I think when young players go into professional football clubs, the standard should be a little bit better than what grassroots football currently is.
Paul, we're going to shift momentum into our second part of the podcast, the game plan. So in every episode, we're asking every guest to contribute something unique to our game plan. This is a shared playbook of stories, ideas, lessons that coaches could draw on. And I'm really excited to hear what you might add, especially with your playing career and your coaching career. So what's the thing that you're going to add to our game plan?
Well, not knowing what you've already got, I might be repeating something that's already been said. Listen, a game plan. What is a game plan? As I said, is it for junior football? Is it for more senior football? But the game plan for me is to implement a lot of the things I've already said. The game plan has to be about enjoyment, expression, exploiting the potential, letting players play to the best of their ability, not inhibiting anything they're capable of, encouraging everything that they do. Now, there's going to be a game plan in terms of the shape you set up, in possession, out of possession, transitions. But the predominant thing for me is players, and of all ages, even in senior football, you've got to enjoy your career, your life, your football on the pitch, coming into training every day. So the game plan for me is typically enjoy what you're doing to the highest level you possibly can.
Well, for any coach listening to this, regardless of the level that they're working at, to bring to the front of their mind, how can they design and create an environment where enjoyment and fun, almost that deliberate play, is part of the fabric of what you do? To hear it from you, Paul, having played the game, coached at high levels of the game, I think it really adds weight to the point that you've made, because without fun, well, people won't come back the next day, the next training session. So they're not going to get better. So by having that foundation, that thread of keeping everything enjoyable and not getting bogged down in some of the results and some of the things that go wrong, but see it as a learning opportunity and all the positive things that you could learn as a person and a player.
Yeah, I think emotions are very high in football, and results certainly make the emotions even more stressful. I mean, when you win, there's no better feeling when you're winning. But I think it's the overall performance will get you that result. So the performance of each player, each individual, identifying what their strengths and areas that they need to improve in. The team camaraderie, the bond, the helping each other on the pitch. If you have all the ingredients right individually and collectively, then the result generally takes care of itself. So emotionally, you can play quite well and the players can play quite well, but you can still lose the game. And that's the danger when everything evolves around results, because there could be a lot of good practice, a lot of good things going on, but you, in senior football, you have to win games of football. And that's the only thing that really gives you time to stay in your career.
We know senior football is results driven. The scoreboard dictates success or not. And development football isn't that. It's about the process. It's about the intention. It's about learning the game. How have you helped players transition from one to the other, where to almost ensure that they keep that enjoyment central, but now it moves from development to performance? What are the things that have helped players bridge the gap?
Well, when I say, it is all about enjoyment, it doesn't mean that there's not an intensity. There's not a requirement to produce their highest level and then push beyond that. So in each session, although they're enjoyable, they're all geared for improvement, because if they're not developing and improving, the next player will possibly do so. So each player, it's quite a cynical game, isn't it, football? If you're not doing quite well, the next player comes in and he does well. If the manager's not doing quite well and he's losing games, the next manager comes in. So it's quite a cynical world, but you have to learn to live with that. You have to learn to live with the pressure and enjoy that and embrace it. Because if you go to train every day and you feel stressed, like I said, you're not going to perform. You're going to feel uptight. You may pick up injuries. Your muscles might not be as loose and as conditioned as they should be. So I keep stressing about this enjoyment, but there can be intensity to it. There's a real desire to learn as well from it, from my perspective. When I saw how Ozzy and Glenn, when they came to Swindon, they were incredible footballers. Ozzy was a World Cup winner, and their impact with their personality, the way we trained, the way we played. And we got to remember, we were going from one style of football to a complete contrast of style of football. And I hear some coaches saying, well, you can't improve this and you can't improve that. I disagree, because I've experienced it. I've seen us get the ball from Fraser Digby. He would kick it as far as he possibly could up the pitch. As a back four, we would sprint up to the halfway line. And this was all under Lou Macari's guidance. This is how we wanted to play. We wanted to power play the opposition and force them into mistakes. And we often did. And then Ozzy came in and we played out the back, the same players, apart from one or two. And we were literally a ball-playing team who played from the back, through midfield, into strikers, out wide, switch play. We played through, around, or over, however we saw it. And it was very little coaching under Ozzy, but it was a system that suited the players and got the best out of the players. Ozzy obviously identified the type of players that we were, and he put us into a 4-4-2, a flat back four diamond, one deep holding player, one player off the front two, like a 10, Alan McLaughlin, and then two narrow midfield players. It suited the players. But how did he know that? Because he had an understanding of football intelligence, of how he wanted us to play, and then he kept the right players in the right positions. And that helped us move forward incredibly. The hardest people to turn around were the supporters initially, because in 1990, they wanted to get it forward, get it forward, get it up the pitch, taking chances at the back. Don't do that, kick it in the stand. And we had to be quite brave in that respect and overcome that and turn the mentality of the supporters around. And that's always stuck in my mind, how we transitioned within weeks. When Lou left and Ozzy came in, yes, it was a summer, like I said, 4 to 6 weeks of transition, but that's still very limited when you're changing players' mentalities and abilities. We were never encouraged to do it under the previous manager, albeit it was successful, but to transform it. And then I used to go on courses myself in my early part of my career, my B license, my A license. And Martin Hunter, who was the tutor, he used to bring up clips of Swindon, how we played out from the back and how educational it was for all other coaches back in the 90s. And it was a pleasure. And I went up on stage once and showed them and told them how we actually practiced it and how we learned to change from one to the other. Again, that was great education for me personally, but also hopefully other people learned from that as well.
Final part of our conversation today is this piece of game-changing advice, which I ask every guest to offer something. And in terms of this advice, it's aimed in a way that coaches might want to pick it up tomorrow and go and try it out in their practice. They might want or need to edit it to suit the context of where they're working, or it might just be something that they think on and they reflect on and come back to it at another time. So have you got any advice for all the coaches out there listening?
Well, I think always challenge yourself. Try and be better yourself. Try and learn from the sessions, learn from your players, what they are and what they're not capable of. Don't over expect too much from players, but be pleased and excited when they do things that you perhaps didn't think they were quite capable of. Keep encouraging, keep exposing them to more challenges, challenge the players to different environments, different opposition, but keep learning about yourself as well as the players, and never stop learning and watching, but always be thoughtful that it's the players who are the beneficiaries of what you're doing. Don't try and jump up the ladder as a coach too early. Learn the groundwork, but learn about the players and enjoy working over a period of time to get the best out of the group of players that you're working with.
Great message. I'm fully on board, wearing my hat as a coach developer, being there to help and support and challenge coaches to, like you said yourself, understand yourself and then the wider environment, the players that you work with. It's critical. And that kind of, I think people have seen learning as a coach to sit in a way that it's divorced from the work that you do. You go and do your qualifications and then you start coaching. But actually in the coaching, every session, every interaction with a player, it's packed full of information that can help you learn.
I think that's a good thing because you have to improvise. I mean, doing coaching badges, you need to put the practice in as well. Practicing is where you really learn from, in my opinion. I wasn't a real high academic in school, but being on the grass and seeing the boys and showing your sessions in practicality is as good as what you can do on a laptop. It's so important that you get them hours in, that you get that practice in, and you learn and you can improvise. Being an improvised coach is so important because things can change so quickly on a training ground where you have to make them little subtle changes. You might have the best laid plans, the best session plan you've ever done, but the practicalities are on the grass, it might not quite be working. So you have to learn about yourself and them little improvises, them little subtle changes that you can make, but you'll only do that by practicing. As footballers practice, as young children practice, when you're starting your coaching career, you're practicing as well, because we haven't all been given the God-given understanding of exactly what should and shouldn't be done on the training ground.
Just to take from what you've just said, and I'll paraphrase, but coaches being prepared rather than overly planned, being ready to adapt to what's happening in front of them. And maybe there's something here about coaches really role modeling some of the behaviors they want players to do. We're asking players to do things that feel quite difficult, that test them where they make mistakes. And as coaches, and I'm a huge believer in this because I make tens of mistakes in every coaching session I go out and lead, but that's where all the magic starts to happen. Role modeling some of this stuff, being open about it. I've tried this tonight. It's not quite worked, but we've gone over here. And I believe, and it aligns to my beliefs as a coach, that being open and transparent and honest with the players is really valuable. It builds trust and rapport and connection. Now, you might not do it the night before the biggest game of your season, but to have that understanding that we're all in this together and we're all learning feels really enabling and empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, players, like I said, they understand when things are not quite right. I've seen a coach, have the best setup, the best plans, and then he's gone into the session and he's made a bit of a mess up, but he was prepared to put his hand up and say, lads, sorry, that's my fault. And I think you get the mutual respect from that. So, there's got to be that understanding between you and the players. What are they expecting from you? They're expecting a leader. They're expecting organisation. They're expecting things to be done in the right way. But mistakes can be made. And it's how you adapt and how you recover from little situations. And I said, improvisation is such an important thing in a coaching session, because your best laid plans can change quite quickly, whether it's having to adapt to different numbers. You know, a player gets injured, has to go off, and instead of having an 8v8, all of a sudden you got an 8v7, and you have to learn and adapt how best to use that player. Do you have a floater player, or do you just have one side more numbers than the other? And how you adapt, and how then you expect from the team with more players, or do you look at the other team and how more organised would they have to be against more numbers? So all these little things, it's actually making me think again now as I'm talking to you. But these are the things that you kind of miss a little bit when you're not involved in it. That improvisation, that love, that understanding, that sharing of all these things that you've been through.
I don't know about you, Paul, but when I get into that state of mind when I'm coaching, I'm in my happiest place. Time just seems to evaporate because you're in the moment, you're there with the players, and you can just mould and shape and craft things together. I frame it around coaching free. That's how I feel when all those things start to happen. One final quick question about your legacy as a coach. It's a fun question, don't worry. So if the players that you've coached along your journey had to describe you in one word, what would you hope that they said?
Supportive. I would go for supportive and encouraging. That's 2 words.
That's 2 words. 2 words. Okay, I'll let you have it. Paul, thank you. Thanks for being a brilliant guest on the podcast. It's been a delight to talk to you, both as a coach and also as a massive Swindon Town fan. So let's hope we'll go up this season. And thank you for everything you've added.
Thanks, Tom. Looking forward to it. And as you say, let's hope after 14, 15 years of mediocrity, shall we call it, let's hope there's a shining light come the end of this season.
Thanks for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow the show and share it with a coach who might find it useful. I'd love to hear your feedback and any ideas for future guests. You can get in touch through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and go well in your next coaching session.